I still remember the exact moment my grill vanished, because it happened in broad daylight, with witnesses, paperwork, and a smug smile that told me this wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. One minute I was flipping burgers for my kids in our quiet HOA neighborhood, smoke curling into a perfect blue sky. And the next minute, an official-looking truck rolled up like it owned my driveway. Out stepped Karen, clipboard tucked under her arm, heels clicking like punctuation marks. She announced my grill violated community aesthetics, slapped a fine on my door, and ordered it confiscated immediately. Before I could even process what was happening, 2 hired workers hauled my grill away as if it were evidence from a crime scene. Neighbors peeked through blinds. My kids stared at me like I'd failed them. Karen didn't argue or explain. She smiled, nodded once, and said, "Rules are rules," before driving off. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a grill. It was about control. I spent that night angry, pacing my kitchen, replaying every HOA meeting I'd ever ignored. I read the bylaws word for word, hunting for loopholes, expecting to find nothing but fine print and frustration. Instead, I found something interesting. The rules banned personal grills in visible areas. They said nothing about events, nothing about shared equipment, and absolutely nothing about community. Cookouts. The next morning, instead of buying a new grill, I printed flyers. I knocked on doors. I talked to neighbors I'd only waved at before. People had stories, fines for flower colors, complaints about chalk drawings, warnings for laughter after dark. By sunset, I had volunteers, folding tables, and one borrowed grill parked squarely in the common area. Karen showed up, of course. She always did. She scanned the scene, confused, as kids ran past with hot dogs and music played softly from a speaker. I handed her a copy of the bylaws with highlighted sections and a smile that matched hers from the day before. "Weekly community cookout," I said, fully compliant. She walked away without a word, but I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't cheer or celebrate yet, because small victories in HOA wars attract retaliation. Still, that night, grills lit up, laughter echoed, and strangers became neighbors. For the first time, the power felt balanced. Karen had rules, but we had people. And people, once united, are harder to intimidate. I went to bed, smelling smoke on my clothes, already planning menus, permits, and patience, knowing the fire I started was far bigger than charcoal. This was no longer about food, but about dignity, community, and refusing to be pushed around anymore. By the second week, the cookout had a rhythm, and the neighborhood had a pulse I'd never felt before. Folding chairs appeared early, kids claimed spots on the grass like it was a ritual, and the borrowed grill smoked steadily as if it knew its purpose. Word spread fast. People from 2 streets over started showing up, drawn by the smell, the noise, and maybe the quiet thrill of defying Karen without breaking a single rule. I kept copies of the bylaws in a folder, just in case, because experience told me she wouldn't stay silent for long. Sure enough, Karen arrived exactly 20 minutes after the grill fired up. This time, she brought backup. Another board member and a security contractor wearing a badge too shiny to be real. She didn't smile. She demanded permits, insurance proof, and the name of the responsible party. I calmly handed her a stack of documents I'd prepared all week. Temporary event notice. Shared. Equipment agreement. Liability waiver signed by every adult present. Each page was legal, clean and devastating. Her face tightened as she flipped through the papers. She tried a new angle, claiming the smoke was excessive and disruptive. That's when Mr. Alvarez from 3 houses down stepped forward, pointing out that the HOA allowed fire pits, outdoor fireplaces, and even wood-burning pizza ovens. Someone else mentioned Karen's own backyard chimenea. The crowd murmured, not angry, but unified. Karen wasn't used to that sound. She left again, but this time she didn't walk away quietly. The next morning, warning notices appeared on several doors, including mine. New violations, noise concerns, unauthorized gatherings. It was clear she'd gone looking for leverage. Instead of panicking, I called an open meeting in my garage. People showed up with snacks, lawn chairs, and stories of their own finds. One neighbor brought a binder thicker than mine, full of complaints she'd never filed because she thought no one would listen. We made a decision that night. If Karen wanted paperwork, we'd drown her in compliance. We formed a neighborhood committee, elected officers, and registered as a social club under the HOA's own guidelines. Someone volunteered to manage schedules. Someone else offered to buy a grill, officially donated to the group. Another neighbor designed a sign-up sheet for food, music, and cleanup. What started as my reaction became a system. By the third cookout, we had 2 grills, both fully approved, and a rotation of hosts. Karen drove by slowly, eyes narrowed, clipboard untouched. She couldn't confiscate what didn't belong to one person. She couldn't fine a group following every rule she'd helped write. The power dynamic shifted again, not with shouting or threats, but with organization. That night, as I packed up chairs and kids chased fireflies, I realized something important. Karen thrived on isolation, on catching people alone, unprepared and scared of fines. But together, with structure and clarity, we weren't targets anymore. We were a community learning its own strength, and I suspected she was already planning her next move. Karen didn't retreat. She regrouped. The following week, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox, thick and official, stamped with the HOA seal like a warning brand. Inside was a notice announcing an emergency board session to review community disturbances tied to recurring outdoor events. Translation: the cookouts had rattled her enough to call in reinforcements. She wanted authority, witnesses, and a room where she could control the microphone. I read the letter, twice, then forwarded it to the group chat that now buzzed daily with neighbors swapping recipes and updates. Instead of fear, the message triggered preparation. Mr. Alvarez offered his living room for a strategy meeting. Denise printed copies of the bylaws highlighted in neon. Someone brought cookies shaped like grills, which felt like the right energy. We didn't plan a protest. We planned attendance. If Karen wanted a meeting, we would fill every chair and then some. We would listen politely, speak clearly, and document everything. The night of the session, the clubhouse parking lot overflowed. People carpooled, parked along the curb, and walked in together. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board allies who avoided eye contact. She opened with a speech about safety, order, and tradition, her voice tight with rehearsed concern. Then she opened the floor for comments, expecting silence or maybe a timid apology. Instead, hands went up. One after another, neighbors spoke calmly. A retired firefighter explained fire safety compliance. A local teacher described how the cookouts helped kids socialize safely. A single mom talked about feeling welcome for the first time since moving in. Each story landed gently but firmly, building a narrative Karen couldn't interrupt without looking cruel. The room shifted. This wasn't about grills anymore. It was about belonging. Karen tried to regain control by citing noise complaints. Denise responded with decibel readings taken during 3 events, all within allowed limits. Karen mentioned traffic concerns. Someone produced photos showing clear driveways and volunteer parking marshals. Every argument met evidence. Every accusation met preparation. The board members whispered among themselves, flipping pages, clearly unprepared for this level of unity. Then came the moment Karen didn't expect. A motion was proposed to amend the event policy, clarifying shared-use equipment and recurring gatherings. It followed the HOA's own procedures, submitted with signatures from over half the neighborhood. The board had no choice but to schedule a vote. Karen's jaw tightened, but she nodded, cornered by her own rules. When the meeting adjourned, people lingered outside, laughing softly, exchanging phone numbers, making plans for the next cookout. Karen left quickly, heels sharp against the pavement. No entourage this time. I watched her go, not with triumph, but with understanding. Power hates daylight, and we'd turn the lights on. The next week's cookout felt different. Not louder, not bigger, just steadier. As the grill warmed and conversations flowed, it became clear we weren't reacting anymore. We were shaping what came next, together, on our terms. The week leading up to the vote felt longer than the months before it. Every day, someone asked in the group chat if there were updates, rumors, or signs of Karen regrouping. There were. Flyers appeared on doors warning about loss of community standards. A few neighbors reported quiet visits from Karen, framed as friendly conversations but ending with reminders about rules and consequences. It was subtle pressure, the kind meant to make people second-guess themselves. Instead, it did the opposite. It reminded everyone why this mattered. On voting night, the clubhouse filled again, but the energy was different. This wasn't defensive anymore. It was deliberate. People arrived early, signed in, and took seats with quiet confidence. Karen wore a bright blazer and an even brighter smile, the kind that suggested control, not warmth. She opened the meeting with procedural remarks, sticking closely to the agenda, avoiding eye contact with anyone outside the board. When the amendment came up, she cleared her throat and summarized it in clipped language, emphasizing potential risks while downplaying support. Then the floor opened for final comments. There were fewer speeches this time, but they carried weight. Mr. Alvarez spoke briefly about shared responsibility. Denise read the exact clause in the bylaws that allowed the amendment, her voice steady. A teenager stood up, hands shaking, slightly, and thanked the neighborhood for giving them a place to feel safe and included. The room went quiet, not awkwardly, but respectfully. Karen looked down at her notes. The vote itself was quick. Ballots were counted twice. When the board secretary announced the result, it landed like a held breath released. The amendment passed. Clear majority. Weekly cookouts were officially permitted under defined guidelines, and shared-use grills were allowed. Karen's smile vanished. She nodded stiffly, already planning her exit, but the room broke into applause before she could regain the floor. Not wild cheering, just honest, earned claps that echoed off the walls. After the meeting, people hugged. Someone wiped away tears. A few laughed in disbelief. It wasn't just about winning. It was about being heard. Karen slipped out a side door, unnoticed this time. The board members stayed behind, answering questions suddenly more approachable now that the balance had shifted. That weekend's cookout felt like a celebration without trying to be one. The grill smoked gently. Kids rode bikes in loose circles. Music played low. Conversations drifted from food to work to future ideas. Someone suggested a rotating host schedule. Someone else mentioned charity nights. What started as resistance had turned into possibility. Karen watched from her porch across the green, arms folded, expression unreadable. She didn't intervene. She didn't call anyone. She simply observed, perhaps realizing that authority without support is just noise. I caught her eye briefly and nodded. Not in challenge, in acknowledgement. As the sun dipped and neighbors packed up, it became clear this wasn't the end of the story. It was the turning point. The cookouts had survived, but more than that, the neighborhood had changed. Lines were redrawn, not by fences or rules, but by trust built in shared spaces and shared meals. The weeks that followed didn't explode into chaos like Karen predicted. They settled into rhythm. Every Saturday evening, grills appeared, folding tables unfolded, and neighbors showed up without being summoned. There was no sign-up sheet, no speeches, no one in charge. People brought what they could and took what they needed. The cookouts stopped feeling like an event and started feeling like a habit, the good kind that stitches people together quietly. Karen stayed distant at first. She attended meetings, enforced rules where she could, but the sharp edge was gone. Without constant complaints to rally around, her authority softened. Other board members began proposing ideas that reflected the neighborhood's mood instead of resisting it. Committees formed. Transparency increased. Meetings got shorter. It turned out that when people felt included, they didn't need to fight the system. They improved it. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in unexpectedly. Instead of canceling, people moved under awnings and into garages. Laughter bounced off concrete walls while rain drummed overhead. Someone joked that even the weather couldn't shut us down now. It wasn't defiance. It was resilience. The cookouts had become less about food and more about presence, a shared understanding that this space belonged to all of us. Then something surprising happened. Karen showed up. No clipboard, no entourage. Just a small tray of store-bought buns, held awkwardly like an apology she wasn't ready to say out loud. Conversations paused for half a second, then resumed. Someone thanked her. Someone offered a plate. She stayed for 20 minutes, maybe 30, and left quietly. But she came back the next week, and the next. Months later, when a new family moved in, they were greeted with an invitation instead of a warning letter. Kids learned names faster than rules. Problems still happened, disagreements still surfaced, but they were handled face-to-face instead of through notices and fines. The HOA didn't disappear. It evolved. It became a framework instead of a weapon. Looking back, losing that first grill felt personal. It felt like control being taken, but it turned out to be a spark. By pushing too hard, Karen exposed a truth the neighborhood didn't know it needed to face. Community can't be regulated into existence. It has to be built, shared, defended gently but firmly. The cookouts are still going. The grill count has grown. So has the trust. And every time smoke curls into the evening air, it carries a reminder that power shifts when people show up together, fed and unafraid.